You know, we sit down for this interview as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to visit India at the end of April, his first major international trip after Britain's exit from the European Union. So why India? There is so much excitement around this trip from both sides. And what kind of partnership are we expected to see?
So you're right, there's huge excitement around this trip. And this is, I think, two things coming together. It's the shared commitment that the UK and India have to build back better as we recover from COVID, as we tackle climate change. But also we both recognise that the Indo-Pacific is the new centre of gravity in the world. And I think strengthening the UK-India partnership at this time will be really important and exciting. We've already had a couple of cabinet ministers visit India to build up the momentum, including Alok Sharma, the president-designate of the COP. And we're looking to develop, on a bilateral sense, a strategy through to 2030 to work with India on areas where we have shared commitment and shared concerns. And I think that's mirrored here in the Security Council. We've got India now on the Security Council as an elected member for 2 years. Of course, the UK was the first P5 member to come out in favour of India becoming a permanent member of the Security Council. And we can work here with India on tackling COVID, building back better, looking forward to India coming forward strongly on climate change, I think will be really important, and working together on some of the very tough conflicts that we see around the world.
And the UK has also expressed this willingness to work closely with Quad countries, being the US, Australia, Japan, and India. These countries have welcomed Britain's initiative. Why is this cooperation needed at this time?
I think it's important because, as I said, we see the centre of gravity moving to the Indo-Pacific. We identified that in the integrated review that we have just published. So that's important. But as the centre of economic and political gravity shifts, we see a rise in competition and tension in the area. And what we find very attractive about the Quad is the shared commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific underpinned by democratic values and the rule of law. And that's very attractive indeed to us, and working with partners with whom individually we have strong bilateral relationships, and collectively we feel that we can build even more strongly as we watch the Indo-Pacific and participate in the Indo-Pacific's rise and strengthening in the world system.
You know, the United States, the UK, along with at least 12 other countries, have criticized the World Health Organization on its recent reports looking into the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. In a joint statement, your governments expressed shared concern that the study was, quote, significantly delayed and lacked access to complete original data and samples, end of quote. So will there be some sort of course of action by Britain and your allies at the United Nations in continuing to call for transparency and finally finding the origins of COVID-19 at the UN, and possibly maybe discussions with China?
So I think we can't really talk about COVID without, of course, extending sympathy and condolences to the huge number of people around the world who have suffered and died, and appreciating the enormous work that the frontline workers, particularly in all of our health systems, have put in. But yes, we joined concern about this WHO report. You know, all of us have to understand the origin of COVID. We have to understand it in order to develop our treatments for it, but we have to understand it in order to frame better responses to any future pandemic. So that's what we want to pursue here, and we want to enable scientific accuracy, so access to data, access to reports and things like that. So the joint call that we made was a first step in expressing concern. We want to work with partners in order to develop that. A lot of the work, I think, will happen in Geneva, which is where the WHO is based. And we also want the WHO to be empowered and funded and stronger as it comes through and has to deal with new health challenges we already know about, vaccination programs that are paused because of the focus on COVID, but also to be able to effectively prevent a future pandemic. So we'll be continuing to look for scientific accuracy and transparency to get to the bottom of these questions.
Britain has been on the forefront in coordinating efforts and taking measures to put an end to the military coup in that country. You've imposed sanctions on entities which provide funding to the military and have led special human rights councils at the UN, just to name a few. However, the killing of innocent civilians continue, and now there is possibly going to be a refugee crisis pouring into neighboring countries in Myanmar. On March 31st, UN Special Envoy Kristen Schraner-Bergner said widespread systematic attacks on civilians in Myanmar, orchestrated by leaders of the military coup, demand, quote, a firm, unified, and resolute international response. She also said that time is running out. So what steps is the United Nations Security Council planning on taking, and what needs to be done?
So you're right. We did, from the moment the coup was evident on the 1st of February, we convened a Security Council meeting, which resulted in the statement that you saw on the 4th of February. The situation continued to deteriorate. We saw another presidential statement with the US in the chair this time on the 10th of March, but tragically, we saw the events on the 27th of March, just last weekend, when more people were killed by the military, and ironically on National Army Day. So a real tragedy that the military turned its guns on its own people. And you're right too. I think the neighbouring countries of Myanmar, including of course India, do face a particular challenge here as refugees seek to flee the fighting and the uncertainty and put pressure on the border. So we recognise that neighbours, India, China, Thailand for example, all have a particular role to play in looking for a solution. What we're looking for overall is an end to the violence, the release of those who've been detained, and for Myanmar to return to the path of democracy. And you're right, the question is, how do we manage that? The UK and the US have put bilateral sanctions on individuals in the military, but also on economic enterprises that we know are run by or associated with the military, in order to try and choke off the access to funds and the access to weapons that the military has and stop the shooting on their own people. But we also need, I think, a way of having peace talks, and I would say that the ASEAN countries in the region have played an important role so far in coming together and in trying to bring the parties in Myanmar towards a framework for a solution. We haven't got there yet, but the ASEAN countries have an important summit coming up at the end of April, and it might be that we can move forward in that way. So at one level, trying to put pressure on the military to stop the killing and to come back to talks and find a negotiated way back to a path of democracy, and then on the other hand to encourage that. And you mentioned Christine Bergener, the Special Envoy of the UN. She is going to the region this weekend, and we very much hope that in talks with all of the ASEAN countries, including Myanmar, she might be able to contribute to finding a way to bring to an end the coup and help Myanmar back on the path to democracy.
Yeah. Is there, when she talks about, calling for this firm stance against Myanmar, one has to wonder, is there the possibility of some kind of force being used ultimately against the military? Has there been any talk of that?
So I think we've already seen the appalling toll that the use of force takes. Already more than 500 people have died, 2,500 have been detained. We don't know how, about 12,000 have fled or tried to flee or been internally displaced in Myanmar. We've seen the national ethnic groups, or the armed ethnic groups, coming into the conflict ostensibly in support of the protesters, but they bring weapons. And the idea that this could descend into civil war is a very real threat. So I think it's important that we don't make the conflict worse. The point is to have a ceasefire and find a political solution, a negotiated solution as a way through. So that's what we're trying to do. But in the Security Council, we continue to have serious discussions, measured discussions about the situation, about how we can move forward. We have a range of measures at our disposal, but we haven't yet decided what the best next move should be. And I think the important thing is too that the Security Council remains united on this, because if the military in Myanmar felt at any point the Security Council wasn't united, that would, I think, risk further impunity. They would feel that the Security Council wasn't united in condemnation, so it's very important, I think, to keep that.
And your thoughts on future UK-Russia relationship after the Russian ambassador to the UK recently said in an interview that London-Moscow relationships are dead after he heard that British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab described Russia as, quote, a threat that uses nefarious weapons, misinformation, and cyber attacks.
So I think we have to be clear here. The British government and the British people have no quarrel whatsoever with the people of Russia. But as Prime Minister Johnson has said, we don't have the relationship with Russia that we would like to have and that would be productive on the bilateral side. We are deeply concerned by the threat that Russia poses through disinformation, through cyber attacks, to our national security, and we need to address that. But at the same time, we would like to move forward if we can find a way through those particular challenges. Here on the Security Council, I think I would say that, as you say, Russia is a P5 member, and it is very possible for us to have constructive discussions on a wide range of issues, situations of pressing conflict, including Yemen, including Libya, for example. Syria is perhaps a bit more difficult. So we try to make the Security Council work irrespective of challenges in the bilateral relationship.
The relationship between the United States and Britain as we sit here in New York, for years the two allies have enjoyed a special relationship. And as a matter of fact, this year marks the 75th anniversary of the first intelligence sharing pact signed between Britain and the United States. So what are the opportunities that lie ahead for US-UK diplomatic partnership at the UN with a new administration in the White House?
So we're very excited by the opportunities that lie ahead. Obviously that is underpinned, as you say, by the strength and the longevity of the special relationship between the UK and the US. But I think we've seen a real surge of energy in the new US administration, beginning to address really difficult issues which are regularly on the Security Council's agenda, whether we look at the work that Rob Malley, the Special Envoy, has been doing on Iran, for example, or Tim Lenderking, the Special Envoy, on Yemen. So real energy now in the cooperation. During the US presidency of the Security Council in March, we had the enormous privilege as Security Council members of being invited virtually to the White House to meet the President. He was very kind and said that next year he hoped we'd be able to meet in person. And I would say, I've been able to underpin that with, I think, developing a strong relationship with Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, which I'm delighted about. But more importantly, I think it gives us momentum in tackling the challenges that we face all together. So whether we are looking at how to beat back COVID, how to build back better economically as we prepare to host the COP climate change summit in Glasgow, whether we're looking at climate change more generally, or whether we're working together on some of the difficult conflict situations. I think we've got a lot of opportunities to develop and deepen our relationship.
Thank you so much for your time and your company, and it was a pleasure meeting you and for joining us on WION.
Susan, thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.